Hey guys, and welcome to another review. Before I get started, once again I'd like to thank Audio Sanctuary and New Mod in London for once again lending me a display unit for an in-house review. And this time I'm going to be talking about Audio-Technica's new flagship model, the ADX5000. So let's get started with the build quality. Now the build quality of the ADX5000 really seems to prioritize the lightweight over all else, and I wouldn't call it the most robust headphone as it kind of rattles and creaks a bit when it's handled. The headband is an interesting design, but it's not one that I found entirely suitable for me because it kind of sits slightly above your head no matter how much you try to adjust it, and it presses a bit into the sides of your head awkwardly if you pull it down for a closer fit. And it's also covered in fabric that is quite the dust magnet. But I can't highlight the weight aspect enough because this is the lightest pair of full-size headphones that I've reviewed to date, and despite that, the awkwardness of the headband on the sides of my head, it did take away from the experience a bit, but it really did overall make my Focal Utopia feel like Goliath by comparison. The connectors are A2DC, which stands for Audio Design Detachable Coaxial. They're so tiny, they feel more suitable for in-ear monitors, but I do understand why they were chosen due to the emphasis on weight reduction once again. And the provided cable itself is 3 meters long and terminated in a 1/4-inch plug. I would have definitely liked to, for the price, seen a balanced 4-pin XLR cable included as well, because I'm not really sure how easy it is to find an aftermarket solution with these connectors. So moving on to the sound really quickly. The ADX5000 is a very resolving headphone in the upper mid-range and treble, and it has fantastic imaging capabilities and a decent soundstage width. This is in full effect in layered productions, for example, songs on Siamese Dream by the Smashing Pumpkins, because this headphone's ability to separate the tracks in a mix is highly commendable. Detail retrieval and air are the name of the game with this headphone, and I can appreciate it for that. But I do think the bass performance was lacking by comparison to the rest of the headphone, and while having more weight and body to it than the Sennheiser HC800, it lacks the texture and precision that I thought would be par for the course of the headphone of this price range, and a headphone that tries to accomplish this level of resolve. And not only that, but it seems to lag behind a little in the transients as well, leading to a kind of plodding sound with several Foster rock and metal tracks. I understand that the ADX5000 is tuned with the mid-range and treble in mind primarily, but it really was like the bass performance was from another headphone entirely, without quite the same capabilities. It also lacks impact and dynamics in this region as well, with the thunderous introduction to Enter Sandman by Metallica feeling a bit thin in terms of both the drums and the underlying bass guitar feeling a bit muted. And it may sound like I'm disappointed here, and initially I may have been, but I did remind myself that not all headphones have to adhere to a certain tuning, and nor do they need to give the same priority to a sonic feature. With that in mind, I appreciated the other aspects of this headphone quite quickly. The mid-range has a very nice amount of body to it, an aspect which I thought was quite lacking on the Sennheiser HC800 by comparison. Listening to vocal layering in a track like Dreams by Fleetwood Mac was a very positive experience because not only did the headphone bring out the nuance of each track, it was presented in a manner that I found really realistic. I didn't get the feeling that this headphone is especially lush or even trying to be, because it prioritizes a dry analytical sound, which makes sense to me with how much it tries to bring out of the mix. When it comes to how downright nice an instrument can sound on this headphone, I found that it's very tied to a few factors. As we're on the topic of mid-range, let's highlight guitars as an example. I will throw on some early 2000s new metal, like In the End by Linkin Park, to find myself thoroughly stabbed in the ears by thin and unsatisfying guitar work in the chorus, because poorly recorded and monstered songs don't really have a place on this headphone to me, and will sound harsh and the opposite of a pleasurable listening experience. If you take the analytical nature of this headphone to a song like The Chain by Fleetwood Mac, you will enjoy every pluck of Lindsey Buckingham's guitar playing thoroughly, and while it still is slightly on the leaner side than a live acoustic guitar, the headphones' sparkle and transients really makes for a very precise and accurate presentation, especially in that part where the guitar rattles a bit. So yeah, the ADX5000 is a very open sounding headphone and possesses more air than my Focal Utopia. The upper mid-range emphasis can be heard from the very first few seconds of Nefertiti by Miles Davis, with the trumpet having a very nice air-splitting texture, as it should. And I don't find the highs encumbered on this headphone at all. The extension is well in place and not rolled. There is a slight dip somewhere that prevents it from being especially sibilant to me. Once again, I would recommend using a well-recorded and mastered track with this headphone, because all my praises above fall short if you throw some brick-walled, guilty pleasure MacBook music on this. Cymbal work is especially impressive while we're talking about the highs. Darting from side to side as a result of this headphone's really nice imaging capabilities, while maintaining a full amount of emphasis needed to not sound too thin or rolled off in any sense, because the bell cymbal sounds like a bell cymbal and a crash sounds as it should. Indeed, it seems my complaints about the bass performance not being impactful enough did not quite extend to the treble region. My one nitpick with the treble, though, is that it sounds a bit unclear at times, and it's as if there's a slight film on the recording, one that disappears when I switch to my Utopia. I'm not quite sure how this came to be, but all the detail retrieval capabilities that this headphone possesses might not mean much to you if you hear this slight film on the sound and are fixated on having the lowest possible, for example, noise floor in your listening experience. Because I did swap out several different types of tubes, and I did try this on my solid state amplifier, which I think was the worst experience overall. Um, but I still felt that this sensation, and I do think it's kind of strange, but it might just be me in this case. So overall, I do quite like this headphone, but I wouldn't want it as my daily driver, because like some headphones I've reviewed in the past, I can personally only see this as a flavor can, because my musical taste is so varied, and the production of all the kinds of music that I listen to is so varied, that I can't pair this with all the genres and think it'll gel well with everything. The things I think it'll do best with is jazz, classic rock, classical music, female vocals, orchestral, that kind of thing. To date, it's been the headphone to most take advantage of my reference source chain in terms of detail retrieval. A thought that often crept into my mind while listening, however, was that this headphone reminds me a bit of a balanced armature in-ear monitor. My limited experience with them has taught me that they can really bring out the finer details in the mix, but the bass is always a little bit disappointing compared to dynamic driver bass, to me anyway. Comparing to the Focal Utopia, while the ADX5000's staging width is clearly superior to the Utopia, I struggled when it came to the imaging prowess and depth between the two. I honestly feel that they go neck to neck, which is impressive considering the MSRP difference between the two. Where the Utopia is the clear winner, however, is with its near electrostatic level speed, thunderous impact, and all around dynamic sound. By comparison, the ADX5000 feels thin and muted. The Utopia also has more focused bass, it's more textured, it's more precise, and really fast in transient response. The ADX5000, while having the fullness and volume in this region that the Sennheiser AC800 might usually lack from like quite a few source chains, it misses all these marks quite a bit. My initial surprise with the bass performance gave way to being impressed with the rest of it, but I still did find it kind of unsatisfying in this region. The Utopia's midrange also has a bit more body to it, especially in the lower midrange, than the ADX5000. This leads to more crunch with distorted electric guitars and a slightly more woody bloom with acoustic guitars. But that being said, and while the Utopia has fantastic detail retrieval, I feel that this aspect might slightly mask its ability to pull as much out of the mix as the ATX5000, because the Audio-Technica flagship is the first dynamic driver headphone that I've heard to date that slightly edges out the Utopia in this regard. It's actually more analytical. What the Utopia does have is more clarity, relating to what I said earlier about the treble being slightly smoky or grainy. To go along with its wider soundstage, though, the ADX5000 is also more open sounding of the two headphones and has airiness, which neither headphone really lacks or has a roof on top of it of sorts, but it seems to go further with this presentation. And it's also less forgiving than the Utopia, which itself isn't a very forgiving headphone, but the ADX5000 can sound absolutely shrill from poor recordings, rather than just harsh like on the Utopia. So amping. So at 420 ohms, this required slightly more volume on my Dragon Inspire IHA1 tube amplifier than other headphones I've tried it with, but it wasn't at an unheard of setting regardless. I did find that the slightly smoother tubes rounded off the highs a bit on the ATX5000 to a level that I preferred a little bit more. So out of my Audio GT NFB28, I found the bass to be a bit fuller, but it still lacked texture and impact. Also, the detail retrieval aspect of the headphone, while still impressive, was muted slightly. The Audio GT's amps slightly dampened sounding nature. So overall, while my concerns with this headphone make it so I wouldn't want one personally, I really do see how it can be a great fit for someone who wants a dry, analytical, and airy sound in their headphone. The ADX5000's ability to separate a mix is its main selling point, as the detail retrieval slightly edges out the folk call Utopia, and if you prioritize the genres that this headphone works well with, I do believe you would enjoy it quite a bit.